Now, the Supreme Court Chief Justice is speaking out after President Trump called for a judge to be impeached. That federal judge is demanding the government explain why it ignored his order blocking the deportations of more than 200 alleged gang members. President Trump posted on social media calling for the judge to be impeached, saying he's radical left lunatic, a troublemaker, and agitator. Now Chief Justice John Roberts is responding. Senior Washington correspondent Devin Dwyer joins me now. Devin, justices normally stay out of anything remotely political. So how significant is it to hear from the Chief Justice on this?
This is an extraordinary development, Diane, and a sign just how big this case has become. And let's not forget that until recent times, it was also highly unusual for presidents to attack sitting judges hearing cases involving them. But of course, Donald Trump has made that the norm. And now for the second time, Chief Justice John Roberts, first time back in 2018, responding directly to the President of the United States.
Hey guys, welcome. Adam is here. Okay, so this is absolutely wild. Judge James Boasberg looked directly at Trump's legal team in open court and said the president's pattern of defiance flirts with tyranny. Those were his exact words. Not a comedian, not an opinion column. A federal judge, lifetime tenure, insulated from politics, delivering a full-throated, on-the-record denunciation from the bench. The third branch of government telling the sitting president in plain language that he is pushing the Constitution to its breaking point.
I have some breaking news that's just coming into our newsroom, and the Supreme Court Chief Justice is saying, not on my watch. He is interfering with calls to impeach a federal judge. Chief Justice John Roberts says he has rejected a demand from President Trump to remove a judge who ruled against his deportation plans. Roberts says for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to a disagreement concerning a judicial decision. So you can't just kick someone out because you don't like what they say, according to this judge. So this is the latest in a call from the Trump administration to have this judge removed. It surrounds a ruling on deportations of alleged Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador.
And how does the President of the United States, the man who swore an oath to preserve, protect, and defend that very Constitution, respond to this judicial check on his power? He retreats to his digital fortress, Truth Social, and demands that Judge Boasberg be impeached. Yes, you heard that correctly.
What's your reaction to the courts stepping in to make a statement here? They didn't make a statement when Joe Biden decided to forgive all those student loans.
Well, he didn't mention my name in the statement. I just saw it quickly. He didn't mention my name, yeah. But many people have called for his impeachment, the impeachment of this judge. I don't know who the judge is, but he's radical left. He was Obama appointed. And he actually said we shouldn't be able to take criminals, killers, murderers, horrible, the worst people, gang members, gang leaders, that we shouldn't be allowed to take them out of our country. Well, that's a presidential job. That's not for a local judge to be making that determination. And I thought it was terrible. In fact, he said when they were well on their way, there was an order issued, as I understand it, to bring them back or to not let them go or something. And this is not something that the country would stand for. These people, they were let in here by an incompetent president who had open borders, and anybody throughout the world could come in.
The president, who is currently facing a tsunami of allegations regarding the abuse of his own power, is now calling for the removal of a federal judge for the simple act of performing his constitutional duty. It is an almost absurdly perfect feedback loop of the very authoritarian behavior the judge was warning against. The irony is so dense, so palpable, that you could literally cut it with a butter knife and serve it on a platter. It is almost farcical how directly this sequence of events plays into the precise narrative that his opponents and the courts are constructing.
All of the planes subject to the written order of this judge departed U.S. soil, U.S. territory before the judge's written order.
The actions of the Departments of Justice, Homeland Security, and Defense were not in conflict with the judge's order. But at the same time, it is also true that the judge's order was patently unlawful. Beyond unlawful, it was an outrageous assault on the Constitution, an outrageous assault on the sovereignty of the nation, and on democracy itself.
Texas Congressman Brandon Gill, who is filing impeachment articles against the judge this week, posted online, "We will not stand by as radical activist Judge James Boasberg tramples on the Constitution out of political spite for the president. The American people gave us a mandate to get criminal, illegal aliens out of our country, and that's exactly what we intend to do."
And here is the kicker, the detail that elevates this from a routine political spat to a genuine institutional crisis. Chief Justice John Roberts, the conservative stalwart who presides over the Supreme Court of the United States, felt compelled to step out from behind the velvet curtain and issue a public rebuke of Trump's call for impeachment.
Rare rebuke of President Donald Trump this afternoon from the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm Scripps News correspondent Nathaniel Reed, and this is On the Scene. Without naming the president, Justice Roberts today took issue with President Trump's recent calls for impeachment of federal judges who have ruled against his administration. In a statement, Justice Roberts saying, quote, "For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose." Now, despite Trump's calls for impeachment, Republican leadership in Congress have not yet taken steps in that direction, and any attempt to do so would be almost certain to fail.
Chief Justice Roberts, a man whose entire professional identity is built on the principles of judicial restraint and institutional decorum, came forward and essentially told the president to back down. He said, in the formal, measured language of the court, that attacking judges for their rulings is not how the American system of government operates. That is how serious this situation has become. The Chief Justice of the United States, the most powerful judicial official in the entire nation, had to issue a public statement reminding the president that you cannot simply impeach judges because you disagree with their legal conclusions. So, what is the actual substance at the heart of all this chaos and judicial fury? We are talking about a lawsuit, a comprehensive and aggressively litigated lawsuit brought by Democratic-led entities that is demanding Donald Trump be impeached and removed from office. But contrary to the bad faith dismissals from the White House communications shop, this is not based on thin air or partisan wish-casting. This lawsuit is anchored to a bedrock of legitimately serious and documented allegations. The legal complaint cites Trump's authorization of military strikes against Iran without even the pretense of meaningful consultation with Congress, a direct challenge to the War Powers Resolution and the constitutional allocation of war-making authority. It cites election interference plots that have been corroborated by leaked internal documents and testimony, detailing efforts to manipulate the machinery of federal elections to benefit the incumbent. And crucially, it ties directly into the ongoing morass of the Pam Bondi scandal. You remember the Attorney General? The one whose confirmation hearing was consumed by questions about her connection to the handling, or rather the alleged mishandling, of evidence related to the Epstein investigation. That entire tangled web of evidence tampering and obstruction is woven directly into the fabric of this impeachment lawsuit. This is a comprehensive, multi-count indictment being constructed in real time, not in a grand jury room, but in the court of public opinion and the dockets of the federal judiciary. Let me break down the specific pillars of why this moment carries so much more weight than the typical partisan sniping that has defined the last several years. Because honestly, this goes far deeper than just one judge losing his patience with a litigant who refuses to follow the rules. This is a fundamental, existential battle over the separation of powers. This is about whether the President of the United States can simply do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, without any meaningful input or check from the other 2 co-equal branches of government. Since the opening moments of his second term, Trump has been operating in a mode that tests the very boundaries of executive authority. He has been signing executive orders that are drafted in secret, bypassing the traditional interagency review process. He has been making momentous military decisions without the courtesy of a phone call to the Gang of 8 in Congress. He has been openly defying and attempting to circumvent court orders that block his policy initiatives. He has been stress testing the limits of presidential power in ways that are genuinely unprecedented in the modern era. And judges like James Boasberg are looking at this accumulating record of executive unilateralism, and they are saying collectively, hold on just a second. The Constitution does not grant you a blank check. There are rules that apply to the executive branch just as they apply to the mail carrier and the school teacher. The timing of this entire convergence is absolutely insane when you zoom out and look at the broader political and legal matrix. We are looking at prediction markets, and I am not talking about random online polls, but actual markets where people are putting real hard currency on the line, showing a staggering 67% probability that this impeachment motion could gain genuine, unstoppable traction in the House of Representatives. 67%. That is not some fringe prediction from a random political analyst who needs to fill airtime. That is the aggregated wisdom of the market, the collective assessment of people who are betting their own money, saying there is a legitimate, better-than-not chance that Congress actually moves forward with formal impeachment proceedings. And you have got Al Green, the Democratic congressman from Texas, who has been a persistent voice on this issue for years, actively backing this motion and putting his full legislative weight behind it. This is no longer just a theoretical discussion that happens in faculty lounges and on cable news panels. There is actual legislative momentum. There are actual whip counts being tallied. There is real political movement happening behind the scenes, and it is accelerating. But here is the thing that is getting lost in the white noise and the chaos of the 24-hour news cycle. This entire sprawling situation is the culmination of every single scandal, every single misstep, and every single institutional backlash that has been accumulating against Trump and his administration over the past several months. You have got the Epstein video humiliation that went viral and exposed the uncomfortable proximity of power to predation. You have got the Bondi testimony falling apart in real time on national television during her Senate confirmation hearing, where she struggled to answer basic questions about her role in the evidence chain of custody. You have got the Iran strikes that bypassed Congress entirely, leaving even some Republicans fuming about the lack of consultation. You have got judges across multiple jurisdictions absolutely raging at the administration's contempt for judicial orders. You have got persistent health leaks and questions about the president's fitness and stamina circulating in the background. You have got inner circle betrayals happening with a frequency that suggests the walls are closing in. And now, in this moment of maximum vulnerability, you have both the judiciary and Congress beginning to coordinate, however loosely, on this impeachment push. So when Judge Boasberg is sitting there in that courtroom, looking at the totality of this evidence, and he says that Trump's defiance flirts with tyranny, he is not making some abstract academic argument about the Federalist Papers. He is speaking as the voice of an entire branch of government that has watched this president operate outside the normal guardrails for so long that they have reached a breaking point. He is saying, with the full weight of his robe and his gavel, enough is enough. This must stop. All right, let's actually dig deep into the anatomy of what is happening here because, yeah, there is an immense amount of legal and political architecture to unpack and understand. Most people scrolling through their feeds are just absorbing the headline "Judge says Trump bad," and then they scroll on to the next dopamine hit without really thinking about the mechanics. But the real story, the one that will determine the trajectory of the next 2 years, is way bigger than just one angry judge venting from the bench. Let's start with the man himself, Judge Boasberg, and establish why his opinion carries the specific institutional weight that it does. This is not some random rogue activist judge that the right-wing media ecosystem can simply dismiss as a partisan hack from a deep blue district. James Boasberg is a highly respected jurist who oversees some of the most sensitive and high-profile litigation in the country, particularly matters involving national security and executive privilege. He is a former presiding judge of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. This is not a guy who is easily rattled or prone to hyperbole. He has been appointed to positions of immense trust by both Republican and Democratic Chief Justices. So, when he reaches a point in a public hearing where he decides to unload on the legal team of the President of the United States, when he uses language that is as stark and uncompromising as flirts with tyranny, it is not coming from a place of ignorance or partisan zeal. It is coming from someone who has spent decades immersed in the nuances of constitutional law and who has watched, with growing alarm, as the current administration has systematically pushed against the boundaries of executive power. He has reached a sober, professional, and deeply troubling conclusion that Donald Trump is operating outside the scope of his constitutional authority and is actively seeking to redefine the presidency in ways that are antithetical to the American system of checks and balances. Here is the specific portfolio of actions that set Judge Boasberg off and led to this judicial eruption. Trump has been governing by a series of executive orders that are drafted and signed with a level of secrecy that is unusual even for this opaque White House. Often, the public and even relevant congressional committees only learn of these orders when they leak out to reporters, and we are not talking about minor administrative adjustments to the federal bureaucracy. These are orders that authorize kinetic military strikes against foreign nations like Iran. These are orders that restructure the immigration enforcement apparatus. These are orders that seek to unilaterally alter federal election procedures. These are actions that have profound life-or-death consequences for millions of people. And Trump has been doing all of this without the pretense of meaningful consultation with the legislative branch. He has not sought their advice. He has not informed them of his intentions. He has simply acted and then dared them to stop him. Now, to be intellectually honest, the President of the United States does possess certain inherent and statutory powers to act unilaterally in the face of a genuine emergency. There are situations where the executive branch must move with speed and secrecy to protect national security. But there is a limit to that power. It is not a limitless reservoir. You cannot simply affix the word emergency to every single one of your policy preferences and thereby bypass the entire Article 1 legislative process. That is not how the Constitution was designed to work. And yet, that is, in essence, precisely the governing philosophy that the Trump White House has adopted. When these executive orders have been challenged in court, and when judges like Boasberg have issued temporary restraining orders or injunctions blocking their implementation, the response from Trump's legal team has been nothing short of breathtaking in its audacity. They have marched into courtrooms across the country and argued with a straight face that the President of the United States possesses essentially unlimited power to act as he sees fit during his term in office. The argument, stripped of its legalese, is that the President's power is at its zenith when acting in the realm of foreign affairs and national security, and that the courts have a very limited, almost non-existent role in second-guessing those decisions. Judge Boasberg sat there listening to these arguments that effectively render the judicial branch a spectator, and he was thinking, "Are you serious right now?" That is the precise moment when he articulated his flirts with tyranny rebuke. Because if you take the argument being advanced by Trump's lawyers seriously, if you accept its logical conclusion, it would mean that the President of the United States possesses near absolute power for the duration of his term. Congress becomes a meaningless debating society. The federal courts become decorative ornaments. All power flows to the executive. That is the functional definition of tyranny in a constitutional republic. And that is the specific constitutional sabotage that Judge Boasberg is identifying. It is not just that Trump is making a bad decision here or there. It is that he is advancing a legal theory that, if accepted by the courts, would permanently dismantle the checks and balances that have defined American governance for over 2 centuries. Now let's turn to the actual lawsuit itself and the specific charges it is leveling against the president. This is not a vague, feel-good resolution. It is a detailed legal complaint. It cites the Iran strikes as a primary example of executive overreach. Trump authorized a significant military operation against Iranian assets without adhering to the framework of the War Powers Resolution. While there is always a degree of friction between the branches over the precise scope of the president's commander-in-chief authority, this was not a limited, time-sensitive tactical strike. This was a major, pre-planned military operation. Congress was not merely ignored, they were deliberately kept in the dark. This is the kind of action that triggers the very specific reporting and authorization requirements of the War Powers Resolution, a law designed to be a check on exactly this kind of executive military adventurism. Trump ignored it completely. He treated the law as if it did not exist. Then you have the election interference component of the lawsuit, which is backed by a growing body of leaked documentation. We are talking about internal executive branch communications and draft orders that outline specific plans to suppress voter turnout in key demographics and manipulate voting procedures. These are not just policy disagreements about voter ID laws. These are documents that, on their face, appear to be a blueprint for rigging the electoral playing field. The lawsuit argues that these actions constitute high crimes and misdemeanors, and when you examine the actual text and the apparent intent behind these documents, it is very difficult to argue that the lawsuit lacks merit. And then there is the Pam Bondi component, which is the connective tissue that links the obstruction of justice to the current impeachment push. Pam Bondi is Trump's Attorney General, the nation's chief law enforcement officer. During her confirmation process and in subsequent investigative reporting, it has been revealed that she was directly involved in the handling of evidence related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. The allegations are not merely that she was sloppy or made a mistake. The allegations are that she actively participated in tampering with evidence, which is a federal crime. That is obstruction of justice. That is witness tampering. That is a direct assault on the integrity of the judicial process. And Judge Boasberg is pointing to this not as an isolated incident, but as part of a broader, systemic pattern of lawlessness emanating from the top of the executive branch. He is saying, in effect, this administration is not just bending the rules, it is breaking the law, and it is doing so in a coordinated way to cover its tracks. So when the judge says that impeachment is not just an option, but a necessary consideration for this kind of executive overreach, he is not making an idle threat. He is sending a distress signal to Capitol Hill. He is essentially telling Congress, the judicial branch has reached the limits of its power to check this president. We have issued our orders. He is ignoring them. The Constitution provides you with the ultimate tool of accountability. You need to use it. And how does Trump respond to this institutional plea from the judiciary? He responds by demanding that the judge be impeached. This is, and I cannot stress this enough, utterly insane when viewed through the lens of constitutional norms. Think about the logic for a second. Trump is arguing that a judge should be removed from office for the act of checking Trump's power. That is the playbook of authoritarian regimes from Caracas to Budapest. That is what strongmen do when they come to power. They identify the independent judges who might stand in their way, and they use the levers of political power to purge them from the bench. When Chief Justice John Roberts issues a public statement saying that Trump's call for impeachment is inappropriate and must stop, he is not just defending Judge Boasberg. He is defending the very concept of an independent judiciary. Roberts, a conservative jurist who has often sided with Republican administrations, is drawing a bright red line and saying, this far, and no further. You do not dismantle the third branch just because you dislike its rulings. What is so wild about this dynamic is that it creates an unstoppable feedback loop of escalation. Trump attacks the judge. The judge, feeling the weight of the entire judiciary behind him, responds by being even more aggressive in blocking Trump's orders. Trump attacks the judge again, this time demanding his impeachment. The judge then points out, correctly, that such an attack on a sitting judge for their rulings is itself evidence of an impeachable abuse of power. And congressional Democrats, watching this cycle of defiance and retribution, use every single exchange as fresh ammunition for their impeachment campaign. The cycle spins faster and faster. The betting markets showing a 67% chance of this impeachment motion gaining serious traction are not based on whimsy. They are based on the cold, hard analysis of legislative procedure. They are based on the fact that Democrats control the House and have the procedural power to force votes. They are based on the fact that a growing number of Republicans, particularly those in purple districts or those eyeing retirement, are deeply uncomfortable with being forced to defend an attack on the federal judiciary. It is based on momentum that is tangible and measurable. Okay, So let's break this down into the core. Actionable takeaways for understanding where this train is heading. What does this all mean for the immediate future? What is the actual trajectory here? Point number 1 is the immediate legal siege. Judge Boasberg has drawn a line in the sand. He has declared that the president's conduct is unconstitutional and that it edges dangerously close to tyranny. This is now a matter of judicial record. From this moment forward, every single executive order Trump tries to issue, every military decision he makes without consultation, every action his administration takes that touches on the separation of powers will be met with an immediate and ferocious legal challenge. The courts are now on high alert. Federal judges across the country are watching what is happening to Boasberg, and they are circling the wagons. The legal system is going to be grinding against the gears of the Trump administration nonstop. His orders will be tied up in litigation for months, if not years. And each of those court battles will generate headlines that reinforce the narrative of a lawless president at war with the Constitution. Trump's immediate response of attacking the judge was a tactical error of monumental proportions. He thought he could intimidate Boasberg into backing down or recusing himself. Instead, Boasberg has become a cause célèbre for the judiciary. By doubling down and pointing out that the attack itself is an impeachable offense, Boasberg has put Trump in a far worse legal position than he was in before. Now, every time a Democrat stands up to argue for impeachment, they can simply quote Trump's own demand that a judge be removed for ruling against him. They can say, "This is not about policy. This is about a president who is attempting to intimidate the judiciary into submission." The transformed political landscape. Democrats now possess a powerful form of judicial validation. A sitting federal judge appointed with bipartisan support for sensitive roles has said that impeachment is a justified and appropriate response to the president's conduct. That is political gold. It neutralizes the Republican talking point that impeachment is merely a partisan vendetta. When Al Green and his colleagues push for articles of impeachment, they can now point directly to Judge Boasberg's statements and say, "We are not making this up. The judiciary agrees with us." That changes the political calculus for every single moderate member of Congress. The Iran war powers issue. Trump's unilateral strikes on Iran were a direct violation of the spirit and arguably the letter of the war powers resolution. That is not going away. Congress can, and likely will, use its power of the purse and its legislative authority to block future military adventurism. And every time Trump tries to circumvent them, it adds another count to the growing impeachment indictment. The international dimension of this is also devastating. Foreign capitals are watching an American president who is being told by his own judiciary that he is acting like a tyrant. That erodes American credibility and soft power in ways that will take a generation to repair. The evidence tampering and obstruction of justice angle. Pam Bondi's involvement in the Epstein evidence fiasco is not a side story. It is the central pillar of a criminal conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of the Justice Department. If Trump appointed her knowing that she had participated in evidence tampering, or if he is now actively protecting her from the consequences of those actions, he is personally implicated in obstruction of justice. That is a felony. And judges like Boasberg are watching the Department of Justice, the very institution that is supposed to prosecute these crimes, become corrupted from within. So, where does this trajectory actually lead over the next several months? Congress will move forward with impeachment. Democrats will use Boasberg's statements as their foundational text. The articles will pass the House. The Senate trial will be a political spectacle, but it will not result in conviction. The 67 vote threshold is too high, but that does not mean the process is a failure. The trial will be a nationally televised accounting of every single constitutional violation, every single act of obstruction, and every single abuse of power. It will be a permanent, indelible stain on the historical record of this presidency, and it will dominate the political conversation right up to the midterm elections, preventing the administration from governing effectively and forcing every Republican senator to defend the indefensible. The presidency is in freefall, the judiciary has sounded the alarm, and now the only question is how much damage is done on the way down.